What's up, guys? This is Bastian here, and today I have a very special guest for you tonight. I have Pejhmon with me to talk us through one of his latest deck creations. We're going to talk about the Swarmlord deck profile.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Pej. Kaloo on the forums, if anyone still actually goes on them. Yeah, I've been playing Conquest since pretty much the beginning. I won the European Championship that happened in God, how old do I want to feel? 2016, and came second in the World Championship that year as well, and then like a bunch of Sword Championships and regionals and stuff like that. But yeah, no, this is an elite swarm deck that I theory crafted for the Swarmlord for my friend Ed to run at the Battle of Barlus event that happened the other week, where I was basically trying to figure out like what would be the best way to make an elite deck in Tyranids. And the default kind of thought process that I went through normally is that you want to stick with either like a Gene Stealer heavy type Subject to Omega deck, or you want to go for Old One Eye. I never really considered the Swarmlord because I didn't think that the support that it's giving is really going to be strong enough for it. But the problem with trying to go like elite heavy on the Gene Stealer side is that you're putting so much Gene Stealer tech already for Subject to Omega to be viable, to really get maximum efficiency out, that there's no deck space left for any real elites. You can put the Yamal Gene Stealer in and maybe one or two others that you use sudden adaptation with, but it's too tight. There's not enough space there. And the problem. Sorry,
if I interject then, because we started to talk about the Swarmlord as your warlord. If I just zoom in on the cards themselves, do you want to talk about specifically what makes the Swarmlord the ideal candidate?
Yeah, sure. So what I realized with the Swarmlord is that of the three Tyranid options, it's the only one that has an event that is that has control, because there's just no control in Tyranids at all. Mm-hmm. And its signature event is the Indescribable Horror, which is like the Tyranid Archon's Terror. It gives you slightly more flexibility with what you can route by not having a unique restriction, with the catch of having to have lots of units. But because you're playing lots of termagants, you're likely to be able to hit the unit requirement for most units that you're facing. And given it just requires number of units and not any other restrictions on that, your Warlord and your Synapse also are included in that count. So it gives you that flexibility of having some control. In terms of the rest of its signature squad, the attachment is kind of useless in this deck. You're almost never going to use it. It's pretty much going to be your shield, which is fine because it's a triple shield. The unit is the unit is good, but it's again not a focus of this deck. It gives you a little bit more command presence, which is something that elite deck usually lacks, and it gives your termagant units an option to play into that command as well. And the support is not going to be played. It just won't be played. It's too expensive. It's 3 cost. It's gunning for a deck that's playing lots and lots of 3 or lower costed units, which this deck is not. So it's unfortunately like the dead card of the deck. But it's a one-off, and you're not forced to play it when you see it, so you don't care hugely. But then when it came to like building an elite deck in Tyranids, what I realized is you have a unique advantage where you have a Warlord and a Synapse unit immediately to be able to contest command. And it means that you can usually guarantee 2 command wins a turn, which is just under half the board. So if you're able to play another unit out that's either uncontested or a big unit that happens to have lots of command on it, you could conceivably win over half the command each turn, which is very strong. And if you're against another elite deck, they're unlikely to be able to contest that level of command presence. And if you're against a command heavy deck, you're probably causing them to not pick up anything. And both cases are a win-win.
And I think that that's where the Brood Warriors actually do become a viable option, as you say, because from the get-go you can do a lot of sniping and you can get a lot of command. But the later the game goes on and the more money you got, you can actually just make your termagants to get the command for you.
Exactly. And if you do happen to have multiple copies or even just one copy, putting a Brood Warrior at planet 3, for example, means it's still viable for you to send your Warlord to either planet 2 or planet 4 as a way to give it the extra command hammer from the Termagant token that's dropped next to it. So you still have that surprise factor with where your Warlord's going without it being too telegraphed. It's going to be a little bit, but it's always going to be a little bit. And like conceivably, depending on the way you play your Warlord, you can have a Termagant token on almost every planet by second round, which is very strong as well. Because if you send your Warlord to planet 3 on the first round, you put some Termagant on planets 2 and 4. You then send your Warlord to the what will become the new planet 3, and you've now got Termagants on planets 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if Brood Warriors happen to be there, then that's more command, and that's just a win-win. So that's kind of why Swarmlord was picked over the other options.
You generate a lot of value from the get-go, being able to put down 2 tokens every time you go somewhere. You just make it's almost like the terrain is getting muddier and muddier for your opponent. It becomes more and more difficult to go anywhere without having to deal with Termagant tokens.
Yeah, exactly.
Why did you choose the Stalking Lictor as your Synapse unit then?
So of the options, like, the concern is always going to be command. Like, because you're not playing that many cheap units, you're not going to realistically be able to fight command through the army units that you're playing, which means that the Savage Warrior Prime is almost immediately drawn off the list because it doesn't give you any command. It only gives you more combat presence, and that's not what this deck needs.
Yeah.
Of the other options, your Warlord is producing Termagants quite handily, and as when we get to the supports, there's also the Lomi Broodhive, which gives you more Termagants. So taking the was it Gravid Tervigon, I think, the synapse that gives you Termagants is not going to help because you're just going to hit your cap too quickly. And then this deck also completely ignores, yeah, that's the card. This deck completely ignores Infestation because it takes up too much deck space to be viable. It's a shame because there's a very good support that would have fit in this deck really nicely. I think the Infestation pool, the one that gives you, it's a cost reducer and infested planet, but there is no space in the deck for the Infestation mechanic card pool because you will need to take at least like 10 to 15 cards for it to be reasonable.
You do need to look a lot to get Infestation going.
Exactly, which then means that the other Synapse units that rely on Infestation are drawn out as well. So that only really leaves, I think, the Stalking Lictor and the Venom Throat Polluter, I think, the one that if you after you commit the Synapse unit, you can pull another unit over to that planet. Both actually would be a good shout in this deck. I think the Venom Thrope is or the Blazing, yeah, it's that one, yeah, Venom Thrope. I think the Venom Thrope is a harder card to play because you need a lot more forward thinking, and it's not necessarily going to be useful from round 1. It's going to be useful from round 2 or 3 onwards because it helps you relocate your Warlord train so that they're less stuck after going to first planets or someone. You just need to put a lot more thought into it, and as a result, the Stalking Lictor just gives you a little bit more kind of consistency in the deck.
Absolutely, and 2 hammers.
It's 2 hammers. Just can't argue against it. It's a blank card with 2 hammers. It can have 0 attack. It'd still be the best option.
I've heard a lot of people on previous videos and reports talk about the fact that, oh, how bad it is for these guys to start with 6 cards and 6 resources, but you do start with an elite team play, and that's always such a good position to start with, that you got 2 units immediately that you can send out. That I think that's often overlooked, and I think the balance is right.
Yeah, and it's redeployable as well. It means you never have a train issue. You have the surprise factor, and you have the guaranteed double command presence, which makes your command game quite strong to begin with. It usually, by most decks, will get petered out by the fact that they've just played more cards by the second round. But in this deck in particular, because you're not sending your Warlord to fights, you don't really care. And that's quite nice.
So many tokens as well.
Exactly.
Okay. So we shall we look at the supports of the deck then?
Yeah, let's go supports first.
So we got 2 copies of the invasion site to start with, 0 cost support location.
Yeah. So as this is an elite deck, all the supports that are in the deck are focused on doing something for the elites. So where I couldn't take the infestation pool as the kind of like alternative economy, I've taken the evasion site instead, which allows for your elites to be refunded after they're destroyed. It's a 0 cost card, which means it's a guaranteed delay. It's not limited, which means it doesn't impact your ability to play the STC or the Ripper Swarm. It's just going to sit there, and it's good.
It's a brilliant card. It's a brilliant card. I mean, we were talking previous to the recording. We're talking about our last weekend and how I've exterminated on a planet, and my opponent just got all the money back with invasion side and just replayed another even larger elite unit. So definitely such a good card, and the fact that it costs nothing, and it will just allow you to constantly apply pressure because you got money. You got money. You got money.
Exactly, and it helps you fund other tricks as well, which is always nice.
Absolutely. So the invasion side is a 2-off, probably because it is a unique support. Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah, so you can't play both at the same time. So if you do have multiple copies in your hand, it is going to clog up your hand. Obviously, between different rounds, you are likely to be able to play all of the copies if you were to run 3, but you're still. It's also a defensive card. It's not an aggressive card. You have to wait for something to happen for you to be able to trigger it. If you keep winning fights, you're not actually able to trigger them, which means you're not able to empty out your hand. So it's a very good card to have, and it definitely is one of the key cards in the deck. But there isn't space for 3. If I could cheat, I would take out the Leviathan Hive shit and put a 3rd one of these in. But that would be cheating.
Definitely a lot more useful than the Leviathan.
Exactly.
Our next support are 3 copies of the Lomi Broodhive, also from the final set of the game.
Yes, so this is probably like one of the key supports in the deck, other than the SDC, which doesn't really need an explanation. But with the Lomi Broodhive, after you deploy an elite unit, you can exhaust this support to put 2 Termagant tokens into play at the same planet as that unit. What that means is that now you are stacking Swarm in with your elites. So even if they manage to kill your elite, they still have more bodies to deal with. And yes, the Termagant tokens are only doing 1 damage, but the more separate attacks that you have, the harder it is to effectively shield against it. Because let's say you take one of the elites that has a 3 attack value on it, 3 attack and then 1 attack and 1 attack, and potentially an extra 1 from the Termagant coming from your Warlord, is harder to shield against than a straight up 6 attack value unit, which means that you are more likely to either completely empty their hand or just go straight through, and both are things you want. And then on top of that, these cards are not limited and they're not unique. You can put all three Loamy Brood Hives down, and potentially off playing your single elite that round, have 6 termagants sitting next to it.
Which is crazy. It's just absolutely crazy. It seems like this support is definitely one of those, the engine of the deck, so to say, because it's going to generate just so many more Termagant tokens for you. And we didn't even talk about Hive Mind yet, did we?
No, we haven't even got there yet. But we will. But I mean, to be honest, even if the Hive Mind stuff didn't exist, I think it's still just a fantastic card.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's a card that I always used to look at and try and figure out how I can make it work, and never could because I was trying to get infestation pool in to get the cost reduction, and then never had space for it because of all the infestation mechanics. So that's one of the reasons why I'm so glad I did just stick to my guts and take out all the infest mechanics, because it means you can fit in like amazing cards like this that will actually do some real work. And it's an aggressive card, which is always better in a deck like this that wants to win as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. It just allows you to spread very wide, and it becomes, again, as I said, more and more difficult. Your opponent looks at your board and you got all these Termagant tokens down, all these elite units, and they're like, what angle can I even try to deal with this problem with?
Exactly.
So as you mentioned previously, we do have 3 copies of the STC fragment in the deck. Obviously, as you said, it doesn't really need much introduction. It's an extremely good card. I think it is at the heart of any elite deck. It just immediately pays for itself and a little more. Is there anything to be said about STC fragment that hasn't been said before?
The only thing that is quite nice about it in this deck specifically is that if you were to play the elite through an STC and then it were to be refunded through Invasion Site, you will gain more money than you would spend.
Absolutely.
Which is a really nice. It's delayed. It's not immediate cash, which means there is a different value to that cash. But it is the fact that you pay 3 for a 5 cost unit and you get 5 money back. It plays very similarly to the way you'd use Death Serves the Emperor in a guard deck. Maybe with slightly less versatility, but it's still quite nice to have. So there is that little side benefit there as well. And a Tyranid deck is never going to run relics, so I guess there's that.
So you will never have to deal with you will never have this problem with competing relics in your deck. Which one am I supposed to have in play?
Yeah, I mean, like all of the Tyranid like big attachments are I've grown a bigger claw.
Okay, so we've looked at the Leviathan Hive ship really quickly previously. I don't think there is really much to be said. It's mostly a deck card in this deck, I believe, but it's only a one-off, so it's not the end of the world. It's not really gonna cause it's not gonna be a big roadblock in you utilizing the strategy that you have built for this deck.
Yeah, so the only card that it actually can target is the Warlord signature unit, which is the Brood Warriors. But the purpose of a card like this is more to prevent you losing a particular hive mind specialization mid-fight. And command is not a specialization that is not an extra that's gonna help you in a fight.
Yes.
So like, yeah, I mean, sure, if you manage to use it twice, it would refund itself, but you're relying on 4 cards in the deck to actually trigger off it, and they're not amazing combat units, and they're not giving your targets anything special in the fight. So like, unless you have like 20 resources you just can't spend, and you want to do a really expensive deploy stall, there's just no use for it in this deck, which is a shame.
I think for those novice deck builders who are perhaps starting to look at building decks in Conquest, this is the prime example where you should never be deterred by that one signature support or by that one signature attachment to go into the direction that you want to go with the Warlord. What you need to remember is the Warlord will be the card that you start the game with. You might not even see a Hive ship as you play many games.
Yeah. And it's not as bad as, say, Baharoth, where all the cards are crap. Except like the event maybe.
Absolutely. Okay, so we have 9 supports in the deck,
Yep.
which may sound a lot, but obviously with the lack of shields, obviously that supports bring you to the deck. Again, I think there is a misconception about trying to run as little supports as possible, but you guys can see for yourselves how very much the whole deck will rely on these supports being online and having these online as soon as possible. So again, don't be deterred about the lack of shields on these supports. They can make or break many deck designs.
Right, and they're also cheap, which helps the playability of them. Like all of them are 1 cost or 0 cost, which means you can clear out your hand very quickly of them. Sure, you'll get a little bit of stagnation if you draw multiple copies of STC or the invasion site, but you still want to see them, so it's still not a negative.
Okay, so with the supports out of the way, let's go and have a look at the army units you decided to include in this deck.
Yeah.
Starting with a 0 cost limited Ripper Swarm inclusions, a 3 of.
So this is your standard command unit. It's free, which means it's another command stall. It is limited, which means that you are going to be competing against the STCs for this. But I think it's just such an all-round well-costed card because it doesn't cost anything. That it just has very good value. It means that you're then contesting command at 3 planets minimum without having to pay anything.
Absolutely.
It's
a stall. It gives you a hammer. In some cases, it's still a 1 attack unit. So
yeah, exactly.
Perfect.
Yeah.
We then look at 2 copies of the Termagant Sentry.
So this is a card that I include in almost every Tyranid deck because it's the only 1 cost unit that Tyranids have with command. So between this and the Ripper Swarm, they are your command presence. And I almost always say, like when I'm including it, that I'm not looking at the reaction because the reaction's a bit pointless. This is probably one of the few decks where the reaction might actually do something. And the reaction is that when the Termagant token you control is destroyed, you can ready this unit. It's minor. It's almost never going to trigger. If it does, all you're getting is an extra 1 attack, but it's better than nothing. And more importantly, it's a 1 cost, 1 command unit that happens to have an extra health.
And that extra health can just make or break it as well. If there happens to be a very early fight at a planet, a warlord there, but your opponent has a 0 attack unit there, this little guy will be able to take care of that. So
yeah, exactly. And the fact it's a body is always useful. Like in one of the games that Ed was playing, he attached the Yumgal factor onto this unit because he just needed a body to attach a unit to, and ended up spending like 7 resources and turned it into like a 5 attack, 6 health monstrosity.
Absolutely.
Something ridiculous like that. I can't remember the numbers, but he needed a body to put the attachment on, and he had a body for it. So it became this insane thing, and they couldn't kill the other Termagants around it because it would ready itself.
And it keeps readying itself. Exactly, I was just about to say, and it just happens to ready itself every time you lose a Termagant, which of course you will have plenty of.
Yeah, exactly.
So nice, neat little unit. And then finally, for our final low-cost cards, we got the Brood Warriors, which we have kind of thrown in some discussion about. It just kind of makes your Termagants do some command work, and it's still a 2/2 for 2, so it passes the vanilla test, but it also does some extra stuff with its reaction, with its hive mind ability in the deck.
Yeah, exactly. It's nice to have to keep that command pressure going. If I had the flexibility to include less of them, I probably would.
Mm-hmm.
I think 4 is overkill in this deck, but it's by all means it's not a bad unit.
If nothing else on paper, because you will more often not drop 2 Termagants per commitment.
Yeah.
This card just becomes exponentially better the longer the game goes on.
Exactly. It becomes a better example of a Iron Guard recruit or Chaos Fanatic.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And now, quite an interesting twist, because this is it for our low-cost units.
Yeah, this is a very high-low deck, and emphasis on the high.
Emphasis on the high. But again, going back to that decision made with the Warlord and the Synapse unit,
Yeah,
they do the bulk of the work that many of the low-cost units do in other decks.
exactly.
So
They are your command fighters.
there's room to play with. And the first big toy we have is the Ravenous Harusfx.
Yes, so this is a one of in the deck. And when we get to the events, I explain why there are like quite a spread of elite units rather than focusing down on three ofs. But the clutch on this unit is that after it destroys something with an attack, you gain resources equal to the cost of the unit that was destroyed, which is another way to try and get your economy back. The problem with this card tends to be that when you are attacking something with it, if you are going to get the kill, they're almost always going to try and shield it to make sure that the effect doesn't trigger. But it does also mean that they might overshield more than they necessarily would do otherwise. It's a nice card. It could do with more damage, but again, you get a Yumgal factor or something on it, you're more likely to get the damage out. Or quite simply, you play it with some termagants, and the termagants attack first. You've softened them up enough that they're probably going to die to your attack. So it's a nice card. It doesn't always have as much versatility as you necessarily want it to, but it gives you a few options. And when with an elite deck as well, you tend to be playing one, maybe two elites a turn. So you do want a little bit of a toolbox to know what's the right elite to play at the right time. And this is certainly not a bad one.
It's almost like shiny golden plated tank that you send forward whilst you can flank from the side.
Exactly that, yeah.
So talking about flexibility, we do have 2 copies of the Imgarl Gene Stealer.
Yeah. So what's quite nice about this card is it gets, yeah. So its stats are not the best on purely blank, where you got the 2 command 4/4. But the bonus stats it gets for its ability are quite nice, especially because it doesn't state your Warlord or your Synapse.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like a buffed up version of like the Evil Sons Warbikers or the Talon Raiders and stuff, where if your opponent sends their Warlord opposite it, they're facing a 6 attack unit, which for most Warlords is an immediate bloody without shields. The chances of your opponent sending a Synapse opposite are incredibly slim, but it's possible. And that would still give it the health boost. And the chance of you sending your own Synapse next to it, to be honest, is also quite slim, with the exception of like final battles. But it's more the fact that it's a Warlord Punisher than anything else. It's the fact that it has that 6 attack value, and it's the highest attack value in the deck, because Tyranids don't have access to that many big hitting cards. So yeah, it's just
with some
good bully
attachments.
Exactly. Second you get a few attachments on, then it gets a lot more out of it.
So it's our beefed up elite Warlord Hunter, I guess.
Exactly.
The next toy in the box are 2 copies of the Caustic Tyranid.
Yeah, so these are similar stats to the Gene Stealers, but with the extra command on them. And the reaction on it is that after you win a command struggle, you gain another new Hive Mind effect where the termagants all gain Armor Bane. The fact you've got a unit with 3 command means you're probably going to win the command struggle.
Well designed.
It's very well designed. Obviously, it's not a guarantee. If you are going to be against something with loads of units, then maybe you might not win that command struggle, but it's unlikely. And you might be thinking like, well, it's only your termagants that are gaining the Armor Bane. It's not this unit. Like a 4 attack Armor Bane would be very strong. Several 1 attack Armor Banes, maybe less so. But what is interesting with it is that those 1 attack Armor Banes guarantee kills where there is 1 health left, which means you're not having to like over attack as much. You can soften something up with this and then follow it afterwards with the termagants attacking, and it will just cause a lot of problems for your opponent. And then as we're gonna see soon with one of the later units, the termagants will also have access to area effect, and if you manage to get area effect and Armor Bane at the same time, then you're looking at board wipes.
Absolutely, absolutely, and this is why Onshi decks will run the gun drones very
Exactly. Yeah, everyone knows how annoying they are.
often. And so again, just another one of those cards that just becomes better every single time you have another Termagant, another Termagant, another Termagant.
Mhm.
3, now it's 4, now it's 5 Armor Bane your opponent will have to deal with. So it just becomes absolutely overwhelming to try and do anything about it.
Exactly.
Our final 5 costs elites are an actual full playset of the Striking Ravenous. What
Yes.
to know about the Striking Ravenous?
So this unit is one of my favorites in Tyranids, where I mean, if you look at it again, the stats are comparable to the Ravenous Harusfx with just the extra command. But the reaction is that after it destroys an arm unit by an attack, you can ready this unit, and there's no limit to that, which means that especially if you got the Termagants around and they've softened up a bunch of units, you can just go on a spree while everything's exhausted and kill everything. It just goes, it goes, it goes, it goes. Especially against like a slightly more lower cost or swarmy deck. Um, so it's a very good board clearer. Um, Interestingly, though, Ed was a little bit less keen on this card and wanted it to be pushed down to a 2 of after the event. So I think his latest iteration of this deck has 2 of the Harusfx and 2 of these, but that's more of a personal preference thing than anything else.
Absolutely.
But I do really like this card, and especially if you do manage to stick something on it like a Yimgar Factor or Regeneration, it's just not disappearing.
And it keeps on giving. The card that keeps on giving. Again,
Exactly.
hammers as well, that shouldn't be overlooked. And it's just got that nice big 5 health point to just keep it going, you know? It can take a beating. It will keep on readying itself and just be another absolute nightmare to potentially deal with.
Yeah, exactly.
Moving on to our 6 costs. Elites. The first one that actually can be quite discounted to only a 4 cost with its deep strike effect is the Slavering Mavlock.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one because so this is a one-off in the deck, and the reason for its inclusion because it doesn't have any command, it has a low attack value for its cost, it has a good body on it, but it's not anything that spectacular. But then when you look at it and you think of it, well, it's a full cost unit, give or take, with the fact that it's delayed spending on that cost. You don't have to pay for the deep strike until after you've won command. It makes it much easier to play 2 elites in a round because you pay full cost for 1 or SDC reduce 1 in your deployment phase, put this down for 1 cost, win some command with your Lictor and your Swarmlord, and then you've got enough money to flip this over. And the fact it happens to come with Armor Bane when you flip it is just quite nice because it means that you're guaranteed to get a kill on most like 3 or low costed units or do significant damage to anything that's a little bit bigger.
It's basically gain 2 money just by invasion sighting it back into your hand as well.
Exactly that. You get big benefits from invasion sight on this card. But it is a lot more situational. You don't get any command from it. The deep strike effect doesn't allow you to trigger the Loamy Brood Hive. So it has slightly more specific uses, but it's a big bad body.
And
And
it's
it looks ugly as
sorry.
I wasn't sure if you're allowing swears on the channel.
Big Bad Buddy Surprise 3 Armor Bane is always a big surprise out of the bushes of the Death World.
Exactly.
And then our final 6 cost elite units at a whole playset, the Warsport Launcher.
So this is the signature unit of the deck. This is the card that the deck loves to see. And the reason is it happens to have its own area effects, but more importantly, it gives all your Termagants area effects. So you stick this down with a Loamy Brood Hive around it, and you've got 3 area effects of the planet. 4 if your Warlord commits next to it.
Try and deal with that.
It's a wipe, and it's got 6 health, which means it's really hard to kill. Your opponent will target these over your Termagants because they want to get rid of that area effect, and they look at the 6 health and they realize they can't, so they target the Termagants instead.
They will try and take it out, and they will struggle to take it out. And by the time they would be able to take it out, it's way too late.
Exactly. And if you happen to get 2 of these on, then you're just laughing.
Because then you're looking at area effect 2.
On the termagants, yeah. It's very strong. And it's one of those things, actually, ironically, even though it has an area effect stat itself, because you're quite reasonably going to get termagants next to it, you're probably actually going to use it for its 3 attack. You want to like properly soften something up because your termagants are doing the area effect anyway. So you've got that good versatility there.
That's exactly what the Tyranids are known for. I mean, at least, card design wise, you can definitely see that FFG was trying to make many of these cards as versatile as possible. And I think for many of these cards, particularly the big units, they have sure succeeded with that. So all in all, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 elite units in the deck.
12 with the Harusfx.
With the yes, absolutely. Thank you. 12 with the Synapse unit.
Oh no, with the Harusfx, you missed out the Harusfx as well.
12 with the Harusfx, and then 13 with the Synapse. So very elite heavy, but every single elite, as you could see, dear viewers, has a very specific place in that toolbox.
Yeah, and quite crucially as well, they're all 6 or lower, which means that turn 1, if nothing else, you can still play an elite. If you don't get your STC, if you don't get something else worth playing, you've still got an option to just stick an elite down, which is quite nice.
Would you say that that could be definitely one of the main play styles for this deck, to try and get an elite out every turn when it's possible?
It's quite nice too. I mean, when you're drawing 6 cards, you're always going to be a little bit more limited with what options you have. So it can make it a little bit difficult to kind of guarantee certain things happening. But what it does mean is that you can always use your first turn to just like dump an elite down with some other stuff, or use your first turn to do setup where you're playing a couple of your supports, maybe some of the cheaper command units, and then you have a bit of cash left over plus what you earn from your command sniping to then afford to play 2 elites in the second round. So there's a little bit of a here and there on it, but it definitely likes to see something come out consistently.
I mean, with a bit of a pre-planning, if you can get a command of your Warlord, 1 command of your Lictor, and if you got another 2 or 3 Hammer Elite, which we do have 7 copies of, you're fairly guaranteed for to win command on 3 planets on the first turn, just by any one of those. These and they're all 5 costs as well, very importantly. So
yeah, exactly.
You can start to cash in very early with this deck.
I mean, like if you happen to have a Ripple Swarm or a Termagant Sentry next to it, then you've got 4 planets potentially.
Okay. Have a look at the events, because the events become a very integral part of this deck as well, to make more money, look after the elites, look after the investments that are being made as the game goes on.
Yeah. So
starting with 0 costs, we have a copy of Biomass Sacrifice.
So this is a one-off event in the deck. This was a little bit more of a test than anything else. But the idea with this is that if you do happen to be getting a lot of card draw and not enough cash draw, it allows you to kind of ditch the elites that are not going to help you in the particular fight that you're happening, or ditch your Brood Warriors or Excess Rippers or whatever it is, to just get the cash to get some other elites out. And it's also action level rather than being specifically deploy or anything like that. So you can also use it in combat to get your tricks out as well, which is quite nice. And at the very worst case, it's a shield. But it's also a 0 cost event, which means it helps push the cost curve of the deck down a little bit, which is always quite nice.
Absolutely. I can definitely see many different situations where this can be a very good event to have in my hand. And if, as you say, don't end up using it, it could be a command stall, it could be a combat trick, it could be a shield. So, and because it's free, it will just give you money. So exactly. I think it's a very good conclusion.
It's a good card. It's better in other decks where the unit count is higher. But that's why it's a one-off. I think it's one of those. It's probably the card that first comes to mind as to like what would be on the chopping block if I did have to change something.
Okay. Then we have 2 copies of Clogged with Corpses. Another cost event.
Yeah, so this again, it helps keep the cost of the deck down. That's part of the reason why you've got the Rippers and you've got the invasion sites. You want to try and get as many like cheap cards as possible to just make the deck as cheap as possible to make the elites more affordable. With this card, its cost is actually in the termagants, where you sacrifice termagants to destroy support cards with an equal lower printed cost as the number of termagants that you've sacrificed. What that does mean is that if you do want to destroy a 0-cost support, you still need to sacrifice at least 1 termagant. Otherwise, you're not fulfilling the condition to sacrifice something. But I mean, in almost every case, however many termagants you sacrifice, it is still worth it. Because what's quite nice about this is, again, it's action level. You can use it whenever you like. But also, it kind of recycles your termagants that have ended up at the wrong planets or have ended up in HQ that are not really getting much use. And allows you to clear them off the board, do something damaging with them, and free up the slots for another Lomi Broodhive use, because you're going to get to the 10 termagant count quite quickly in most games. So it's a good way of just kind of like cycling through, and it gets rid of an annoying support. It's got no restrictions on the type of supports you can get rid of, so you can use it on pretty much anything.
Crypto Saint Camilla is the first one that comes into my mind, of course. That support in the game. Okay, so it's quite an interesting view that you're giving, just even to myself, on this particular card, because I probably wouldn't have thought about recycling some termagants that got stuck on the last planet. But it's also interesting to know that you definitely have to sacrifice at least 1, because it's part of the cost of the card.
Yeah.
Excellent. The more you know. And on to these fan favorite cards. First of all, we got another 0-cost event, 2 inclusions, No Mercy.
So No Mercy prevents your opponents using shields. So where your Armor Bane hasn't kicked in, you're still going to go for those guaranteed kills. And this works particularly well with the Ravenous Harusfx and the Striking Ravener, because they both trigger on killing something. And what's quite nice about No Mercy in this deck is, one, in Tyranids, you can use them on Synapse, on any elite unit anyway, but Synapse units are elite units, which means you've got 2 targets from the beginning of the game that you can exhaust, which is always really nice. And your Synapse unit tends to be in a planet that doesn't have a battle, so you don't really care if it gets exhausted after command. And then 2, your Warlord's probably not going to be in the fight either, so you've still got another unit that you can exhaust for it, even if the Warlord happens to be at somewhere that might have like a command unit opposite it that you're fighting. You're still not going to care too much if that is the card that you need to exhaust for the cost of this. And then again, it's 0 cost. The deck needs to be kept as cheap as possible, and this is a cheap trick.
I love No Mercy, and I always struggle to put it into decks because often, unless you're playing with the Swarmlord, that allows you to have obviously a synapse unit, it often becomes a problem to be able to generate extra unique units if you need your warlord to be in the battle.
Yeah.
This deck, you got 2 unique units that don't want to be in the battle, so that can allow you to play 2 No Mercies in the same combat and just give maximum fuck.
Exactly. It's a really good aggressive card, and this is an aggressive deck. It wants to win as quickly as possible, and this helps it do that.
Perfect. We then have 2 copies of Backlash, another good, very solid card for any elite build.
Yeah. So, I mean, as you've said, we've got 12 elites in the deck. It's over half of the units that the deck has. And Backlash also protects the Synapse, which is it's rare that something will target the Synapse because of the non-armor unit restrictions and stuff like that. But it's a nice to have where relevant. It's just a very, very good card for an elite deck. It helps prevent a lot of the tricks that would cause problems for you, like getting rid of your Spore Launcher to prevent the area effect and things like that. So it's just a very good card in this deck.
The extra beauty that comes with Backlash, I suppose, is that it also destroys the triggering arm unit if it comes up, so it can give you so much value. And you don't need to always get that extra value of the card. It's still good, just with its basic interrupt. But there's that little extra fruit that you can pick up free with Backlash.
Yeah, exactly.
And of course, 2 copies of Fallback. Again, it's a pretty much must-have in any Elite deck. It's more about, again, just this getting our value back for our buck kind of thing. So what's there to be known about Fallback?
Yeah, I mean, you've described like the key benefits of it. The extras that you have in this deck is that it can save your Synapse unit, because it doesn't specify elite army unit, it just states elite unit, which is quite nice. Because if you lose your Synapse unit, you are losing your command game quite quickly. And then separately as well, it's a reaction which the evasion sight also is. So if you happen to have 0 money and one of your elites is killed, and you have the evasion sight and fallback out, you can trigger the evasion sight first because you've got choice of reactions. Get the resource refund off the unit and then use that resource to pay for fallback. So not only have you fully refunded the unit that you had, you still have the unit in some capacity. And if you happen to play that unit through the STC in the beginning, you've still got 1 spare cash, as like pure gain, which is a really nice combo if you can pull it off.
Super combo. And yes, those of you who are still fairly new to the rules in Conquest, basically when something happens, there is a window of reaction and the players take turns reacting. If you're the only player who has reactions, if you got 50 reactions, then you can react with all the 50 reactions one after the time, giving your opponent a chance to also play a reacting response.
Exactly.
And we also have our signature events, last but not least. We've already talked about the Indescribable Horror, but just such a solid card, really.
Yeah.
Or basically, in red.
Yeah, and especially because like if you are playing an elite with a Lomi Broodhive out, that means you've got a minimum 3 units out on the planet. Your Warlord commits to it, or your Warlord commits next to it, you've got a 4th unit. If there was anything else, then you're going up into 5-6 territory. So like, with the exception of like the biggest elites in the game, so like your Black Legion Helldrake or something to that effect, where it's like 6, 7, 8 cost. Almost everything can be targeted by this event. And it ignores the unique restriction that Archon's Terror has, which means that you have a slightly larger pool of targets for it. And just routing is good.
Good. Yep.
Anyone who's ever played against Dark Eldar knows how annoying it is.
Routing is very good.
It's good.
Why deal with a problem if you cannot deal with a problem?
Exactly. And it helps you get rid of the problems that you may not be able to kill fast enough, like area effect units and so on.
Absolutely. If there's something that's problematic and you think that your horde of elites and termagants can't deal with, you can just go and relax if you got the Indescribable Horror in your hand.
Exactly.
We then have 2 copies of Sudden Adaptation, another fan favorite for our the Swarmlord deck that we're running here.
Yeah, so this is an interesting combat trick, and then Tyranids generally lack combat tricks, so it's one of the few that you really have access to. But what's nice about this is that you return an army unit that you've played to your hand, and then put another card down of equal or lower cost with a different name at the same planet. Now, because it states to return and then play, it's not a direct replacement, which means that the state that the card was in previously doesn't affect the state that the new card will gain. So if you had, let's say, a Yungal Gene Stealer with 3 damage on it, it's got 1 health left, it's already attacked, so it's exhausted, you can pull it back to your hand, wipe off all that damage, and play the Striking Ravener, full health, readied. and immediately there to attack. And from like a costing perspective, it's a pretty fair cost for the event. But also, if you did happen to pay the STC previously, when you played the elite, that's the 2 money that you didn't spend on the elite and then spending on the event, which is quite nice. And this is one of the reasons why the deck has a spread of elites, because it gives you slightly more flexibility with this card rather than going like hard on triples of cards, because that would mean there's slightly more chance of your hand being clogged up with multiple copies of the same card and therefore not being able to play this event. And that's also why it's quite helpful that the majority of the elites are 5 cost, with the exception of 4 of them being the 3 Spore Launchers and the 1 Slavery Morlock. But it's also why the Morlock has a slight extra benefit of it's a 6 cost unit, so it can be sudden adapted into anything, which is quite nice.
So a lot of cost saving. It allows you to heal a unit, put a brand new unit, ambush a unit into play, basically. So again, it just does so many things. Now, I have a question for you. I mean, you may have mentioned it, but I probably was zoned out if you did mention it. Would the hive mind ability from a Spore Launcher stay on the termagants if I take it back with an adaptation?
No, so it only applies when it's there.
Okay.
So that's why it would be one of the cards that your opponents would try and kill off first to try and get rid of the area effect.
Would you be able to put a card with the same name but not the same card into play with sudden?
No, and so that the reason why they've written it to say equal or lower printed cost and a different name is so that you don't have to have that argument of I don't know what's in your hand to prove that you have two copies or not.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's why you have to change the unit, which I think is a fair restriction. It means you're not having to pull the judge around in the tournament every time someone plays a card, so on and so on.
Whenever I think about how this game was designed, I see so many good practices. Avoiding situations like this, as we're talking about, is that you don't have this ambiguity about, well, do you really have another copy in your hand? And another one is with the search cards. Most of your search cards will just put stuff at the bottom of your deck, so you're not spending minutes about shuffling, cutting, and when you got a best of 155 minutes, time is at the essence. And I think the design of the game is so flawless from this perspective.
Yeah, totally agree. It keeps the game going. There's no downtime in it as a result. I remember when I went to Worlds, I had a chat with Brad Andrews, the one of the lead designers on it, about like why there were a handful of cards that did introduce the shuffle mechanic after they were played. And one of the things he said was he wanted to keep things on the search mechanic with the stacking at the bottom of the deck, like the Earthcast Technician, that type of thing, as much as possible. But for certain cards, they just didn't have the space on the card to write all of that.
Yeah.
So the cards that have the shuffle mechanic only have it because they have no other choice but to write shuffle.
and I think as far as I've noticed, there really aren't many cards within the faction. So I'm thinking about 1,000 Cuts is Dark Eldar, whereas Earthcast Technician is Tau. You're not going to have them in the same deck, so you won't be able to potentially bring up the stuff to the top that you put there. So even if that instance does occur, it occurs very rarely.
Yeah, I think 1,000 Cuts is probably the most playable example where it's shuffle, and that was definitely an intended shuffle rather than a space issue, because it's got hardly any text on it anyway. But like, there's like a big Tau elite that you search 9 cards and then shuffle your deck or something. Yes. And there's like the Neophyte Apprentice and stuff like that, and those cards don't really see play. So
I think even on that Tau, you don't. Yeah, I think you still put them at the bottom. But
yeah,
might be wrong.
Yeah,
I'll search it out now as pile of cards around me. Anyway, Sudden Adaptation, again, a very flexible, very good, useful, well-costed card. And it has the perfect spot in this deck.
Sure.
And then our final event, maybe a little bit more costly, but what it does is certainly eyebrow-raising. We get the Consumption at a 2-off 4-cost event, deploy action, each player must sacrifice a unit at each planet if able.
Yeah, so this is your board wipe card. This is where you start to cause real problems for other decks, especially if they want to play if they play several elites across different planets, like in a later round, or if they've gone for like quite a heavy command spread. And what's quite nice about this card, again, drawing back to the fact that you're dumping termagants everywhere for your warlord, is that you are not restricting on what kind of unit you sacrifice, which means you can choose to sacrifice your termagants. So if let's say you commit to your warlord to planet 3 in the first round and planet 3 in the second round, you've got termagants in round 2 on planets 1, 2, 3, and 4. Actually, let's say you committed to 4 on both turns. So round 2, you've got termagants on planets 2, 3, 4, and 5. So in round 3, you'll have termagants on 1, 2, 3, and 4 when the round starts. You can play consumption quite happily and not really care about what other units you have out, because your termagants are going to be taking the hits. But then also conversely, if you do manage to go second at the beginning of the game and you are able to play some of your supports out, so for example the invasion site, which is free, the Lomi Broodhive, which costs you 1, maybe an STC that costs you 1, you can delay long enough to then play consumption in the first round. And against the Swarmy deck, you're hitting probably 4 costs of unit at that point. Against an elite deck, they may have paid less than 4 for that unit, but they still would have had to play an STC or something. So you're still getting value for it. And what you're leaving the board in is a complete reset state where you have 2 units and they have 1. So it's just strictly better, and it's not even 2 units; it's actually 4 units. So it's quite nice in multiple situations, a little bit more than the equivalents in other factions like Exterminatus and Doom and such.
Which will obviously focus on either HQ or one specific planet. Even Warp Storm, and then Warp Storm is not guaranteed, to get rid of units in many instances. So to me, consumption definitely feels like one of the best board wipe cards available.
Yeah, exactly.
As you mentioned, you can also quite happily play out one of the Ripper Swarm as well after a consumption. It doesn't even the Necron Sweeper allows you to pass after you play it, whereas this one allows you to carry on playing. So if you got still something that you can commit to a planet, as you say, you're pretty much guaranteed to get at least 1. In case of course the warlords meet, then they negate each other, but the Lictor will be able to take you 1 command, and you possibly take you more commands with some other little army units that can still put out after consuming all that biometa.
Yeah, exactly. It's very strong.
So that's it for events. Quite a hefty chunk of events, but again, as you guys can see, the deck is very much equipped with many tools to defend the elites, to get you board advantage, and to basically cash in many investments that we do with these nicely costed elite units. So on to attachments then. Let's get the signature attachment out of the way, because I know that, again, this is not one of the main cards for the deck.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. I mean, it gives your warlord an extra attack, which is always going to be nice. Like a 3-attack warlord is not something anyone would complain about. It also gives your warlord the ability to spawn termagants at a planet, which is again nice because it means you're getting more attack. But the thing is that so the spawning the extra termagants is a little bit win more in the warlord. But if you're playing the Swarmlord as a first planet bully, then it's quite nice for that, because it means you're more likely to win the fights. But that's not how you're playing Swarmlord in this deck. You're playing Swarmlord for command, which means that you're more likely to need this as a shield than you are for the actual attack. By all means, there will be situations where it's better to have a beefed up warlord, but I think generally speaking, it's probably going to be your shield in this deck. But in fairness, it's not a horrible attachment by any means. Giving your warlord extra attack is always good. It's just not as good as it could be as a shield.
Well, luckily these signature attachments do come with the 3 shield icons, which basically makes sure that they're never quite dead in any deck.
So now we got the Young Girl factor, which is the only double shield card in the deck. And to be honest, you're probably rarely going to actually use this as a shield anyway. But what's interesting with this card is that it costs you 1, and immediately it doesn't do anything. It's a blank card for 1 until you actually use the action, and the action requires you to spend more. And with each money that you spend, you gain attack or health. What this means is that you can target making a unit really beefed up, either aggressively for attack or defensively for health. And you've got the flexibility to choose what you want to do and which way around you want to do it, provided you've got the money for it.
Which likely you will.
Yes, exactly. Especially because you're reducing the cost of the elites as you're playing them, the refund on the costs when the evasion site kicks off. All this stuff is all stuff that will give you more flexibility with the Imgal factor. And then on top of that, the command you're likely to be winning with your other units. Which makes this a very versatile card, which again is quite key to be an answer for problems that come up, especially because again Tyranids don't really have that many tricks. What's nice is that like you putting this on a Spore Launcher will allow you to put enough health on it that it's going to be very difficult for your opponent to get rid of that unit, and therefore all your termagants are going to have area effect for the rest of the fight. And then similarly, you put it on the Harusfx or the Striking Ravener, and you give it plus attack, and then they're more likely to trigger the abilities that they have. So the money or the if you put it on the Harusfx as you've got there, and put 2 money on it, so it becomes a 7 attack unit, it can kill almost any unit in the game. And if it does kill like a 5 cost elite, you've made the money back and more. And then at that point, if you really need to, you just put some more health on it. So it's just very efficient with the cards that are there. And then with the Striking Ravener again, like you put it on attack, you're almost going to guarantee most kills. You put it on health, you guarantee it's going to be there, and it can just wipe the board. So it's a very good card.
Crazy,
but it's a very cost intensive card. Yeah.
It becomes better the more money you got. In fact, one might say that unless you have a plan to be able to fund the action, probably worthwhile just keeping it in the hands until you're sure that it's going to be effective. But when it becomes effective, it's extremely effective.
Exactly.
And at last, but certainly not least, 3 copies of Regeneration.
Yeah, so as you may have noticed, that a lot of the elites that Tyranids have, and a lot of the elites that are in this deck, they're quite health heavy and not attack heavy, which means that they have a lot of staying power. And Regeneration extends on that principle. It gives them +2 health and gives them a repeatable ability to heal each round by exhausting the attachment to remove 2 damage. So if you put this on, say, like the Spore Launcher, which has 6 health, it's now an 8 health unit that's taking 2 damage off every turn, which is very strong. And yeah, none of them have less than 4 health, and even the 4 health unit being the Gene Stealer could potentially have 6 health in a fight as well. So you've got a lot of health already, and you're just extending that slightly further, which becomes very, very strong very quickly.
Making a desperate fight feel unwinnable.
Exactly. And it's a 1-cost card again, which keeps the costs down. So it's a very clear 3 off because it always has value in this deck.
And as I said, I feel that this card particularly replaces the need for 2 shield cards anyway, because your unit will get +2 HP, which is basically the equivalent of using a 2 shield card. But also just by exhausting it and being able to heal it almost makes like you can never get rid of these. If you're the opponent, you will feel like you can never get rid of these massive cogs elite cards that just make this deck so destructive. So really good card again. And this pretty much takes us to the end of the profile. And, well, a wealth of information from you, Pej. So thank you so much for covering this deck profile with us for the viewers. How does it feel to be back in a podcast style video again?
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. I do miss just chatting shit on camera, to be honest. But it's yeah, no, it's good. It's good to just be engaged again, especially after so long. And I'm just so glad that those tournaments are happening down in Western Supermare as well. Like, I know that it's like 4 a year and stuff, but it's still nice that like everyone is coming together, and it did kind of like make me a little bit nostalgic for like how it was back in the good old days.
And I guess it allows you to do brewing. You know, you are so accomplished with the tournament scene that you can kind of like just sit back and relax and look at these very explosive, very technical, but surely the more one plays with them, the vastly better they can be with these decks. Kind of avenue you're coming in from.
Yeah, exactly, and especially because there were a few like deck styles that I didn't necessarily explore as much as I should have, like this one, because I wrote off the Swarmlord back in the day quite quickly, which maybe I was a little bit hasty to do. But yeah, these tournaments give you that flexibility to just get a little bit more out of the game, try a few different ideas, things that maybe wouldn't have when you're worried about like massive tournaments that have big prizes at the end of it and stuff like that. But it's nice.
So just for me, closing words, anybody who's watching this video, there will be another Warhammer Conquest tournament in the UK, Western Supermare, not too far away from Bristol. So if you decide you want to perhaps fly in from a different country, from internationally, you can actually fly to Bristol, and it's probably definitely less than an hour's drive away, about half an hour to get to Western from Bristol. So if you guys feel like coming, 20th of February 2022, you can hopefully meet both of us, depending on commitments, but I think we will probably be there. And then perhaps you can come and play against this deck or with this deck. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure how happy Ed would be if he has to face a whole bunch of these as well, but
Well, there's a challenge. How well you do in a mirror. Can you manage the backup in a mirror?
Be quite funny. Just a stack of termagants everywhere.
Absolutely. Right. Thank you so much again for joining me today and talking me and all the viewers through this deck. It's an absolute joy to have you on the channel. And for the viewers, any parting words from you?
No, nothing else for me. I think they're probably fed up of me speaking at this point. But no, it's been an absolute pleasure as well. It's just good fun to talk about Conquest.
Well, thank you again. And thank you for the viewers as well for sticking with us for an hour and 10. I hope you've learned a lot about the Swarmlord and this particular early deck. Until next time, guys, Busse and signing out.
See ya.